G'day, mate. 40 here. So right now, if the election was held today, I think you'd have to say that Kamala Harris would be the favorite to win. She's been on a good run for the past 2.5 weeks, and Donald Trump may not be exactly panicking, but he definitely wanted to try to reset. He wanted to reset the terms of the election, and I caught much of his press conference today, and he's not very likable. All right, he's got my vote. But I understand why, if this election comes down to vibes, comes down to personality, comes down to feelings, right, Donald Trump's going to lose and Kamala Harris is going to win. Now, how long can she maintain this joy vibe? Because Kamala Harris is not known for transmitting joy. She does not have a track record of raising morale, right? The people who work for her have tended to hate her. She's unable to keep anyone around very long. All right, that doesn't seem like a demonstration of joy. So I can understand the exuberance that Democrats are feeling right now, because it must have been so depressing having Joe Biden as your lead candidate for the 2024 presidential election. But there's nothing inherent in Kamala Harris that consistently brings joy. And it's not so easy to keep bringing joy when you're simply tightly scripted. And so will Kamala Harris be able to keep bringing joy when she's off script? The other thing that stands out from the first few days of her campaigning with Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota is how much more effective and how much less self-conscious he is compared to her. So that when she campaigns together with Tim Walz, right, there's going to be a negative reflection on her, because she is just so self-conscious, so insecure that eventually you would think that would pour through. On the other hand, she's got the very smartest, most capable people running her campaign, right? These guys are really good. They're not her people, right? They were brought in, and they are running a highly effective campaign. And if they're able to just keep her on script, right, there's a very good chance that she'll win this thing. So is Donald Trump panicking? All right, here's Chris Saliza.
Chris, it is Thursday, August the 8th. I got my new hat. Bought this on vacation. Social. Which is kind of interesting in that he's faced a lot of criticism this week for the fact that he's not doing much, right? He's doing an event in Bozeman, Montana on Friday. He hasn't had any other public events. He's done a few interviews. He called into Fox and Friends and that sort of thing this week, but he really hasn't done all that much. And I came across this tweet, this X.
So Donald Trump has never been a hard worker. All right. And if you're behind in the polls, holding more events does not necessarily translate into gaining more votes. All right. It has to be these events, winning events. And you pack a large, enthusiastic crowd. When 10 days ago on a Saturday night, I looked at some video of Trump giving a speech, I believe, in Georgia, and there were people behind him yawning. So if that's what you bring to the table, no reason to have more events like that. And that's when he went off for many minutes complaining about the Republican governor of Georgia, which diminished morale and enthusiasm among Republicans.
I don't know what you call it anymore. From Stephanie Grisham. You'll remember Stephanie Grisham was a press aide in the Trump White House and has since sort of turned to be a Trump critic. Here's what she tweeted. In regards to Trump's self-announced press conference, he's panicking. I've seen this play many times. He thinks his team is failing him and no one can speak better or save his campaign and defend him but him.
I think this is an accurate critique. It is telling that about half of former cabinet members for Donald Trump do not support him this time around. So Donald Trump is able to maintain much more support from the people who've worked for him than Kamala Harris. But still, right, a great deal, about half of his former cabinet members don't support him. That is telling.
He hates the coverage Harris is getting and thinks only he can fix it.
That's a good point. I mean, Donald Trump spends hours and hours and hours a day watching cable TV. He would get about 6 hours a day, all right, would be marked off on his presidential calendar for executive time, which is really time for Donald Trump to watch TV. So Donald Trump did not work hard, was not a particularly effective chief executive. For example, he did nothing to improve the quality of the Secret Service. Now, I think he was a far superior president to Joe Biden, to George W. Bush, to Barack Obama, but not terribly effective as a president, not terribly hardworking either. I mean, the amount of time that this guy spends watching cable TV news is dispiriting.
So I think there's a lot of truth in that. Donald Trump is a very savvy consumer of the media environment. He is a believer in the sort of all press is good press view of things, that if he's dominating the conversation, then he's winning. And he's been proven right a lot of times. So I think what you've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but there's a solid 50% of the American public does not like him. And I don't think more press conference is going to do it. And so a press conference with Donald Trump is not like a normal press conference, because he doesn't really answer questions, and he doesn't feel any accountability to facts and reality. And he just paints things in the broadest strokes that Joe Biden is just, the dumbest guy, that Kamala Harris is just a moron. And so he doesn't take questions seriously. He just goes off on tangents and free associates. So when Donald Trump holds a press conference, it doesn't carry with it the same level of accountability that it does for other politicians who might feel more constrained by answering questions and dealing with facts.
Since Biden dropped out and it became clear Harris was going to be the nominee, is you've seen her absolutely dominate coverage. The story is that young voters are now more excited. People of color are now more excited about the Democratic nominee. You see these crowds she's getting, huge crowds in swing states. And remember, crowd size matters to Donald Trump. You see the polling that has her now ahead nationally by 1.5 or 2 points and tied basically in every swing state. You see the energy, right? You see the excitement. You see the, as I have talked about, and as the Harris and Walz campaign talks about, the joy that's emanating from them. Donald Trump hates seeing that. It makes him crazy. There is no question about that. He has lost control of the narrative of this campaign, which is not really something he's experienced all that much. He has sort of held the narrative very tightly over his 9 years in politics, mostly because he says and does things almost every day that draws huge amounts of attention to him. Again, if you believe all press is good press.
Right. Even in your personal life, you probably know people who just need attention, right? And when they're not the center of attention, they get uncomfortable. And so this common critique, this common problem probably also applies to Donald Trump.
Then just getting press attention is the key. So I think he does think he is his best messenger. He does think he is the smartest person in the room. He does think.
And it's not true, right? He's not always his best messenger. He is rarely the smartest person in the room. He's got a moderately above average IQ, probably around 120. This is Chris Cillizza, guy in the baseball hat, former Washington Post politics correspondent.
I think he is the smartest strategist. And maybe the only person who can change this dynamic right now. So I do think Stephanie is right in all those regards.
And that's wrong. Donald Trump is not the best strategist. All right. He ran a reckless, undisciplined, and losing campaign in 2020. If he'd had any kind of discipline, he would have easily won re-election.
I think that Trump's campaign is much better run this time. I've said that before. But I think ultimately, when the chips are down, Trump is going to Trump, right? He's going to do the things that he believed got him there, which is rely on his gut. He always has in business. He always has in politics, and he will continue to do so. Now, the broader question here is it two questions. One, is he panicking? And two, does it matter? I think panicking is probably too strong a word. I wouldn't use that word. I would say he's clearly nervous and unhappy about the current situation. There is no question that the press conference is an attempt to wrest back the narrative, to get the spotlight back on him, to get people talking about him and him alone. So I do think there's clear strategy there, and I think that strategy is born of his concern that people aren't talking enough about it. Now, how much does it matter? Look, it's still August. There's, I think, 89 days left before the election. So there's still a decent chunk of time. I do think the political map and sort of the political calculation is a reset. We are now back to where we were pre-June 27th debate, which is there are 6 swing states: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The candidates are basically tied in those. It's looking like it's going to be extremely close, both nationally and in the Electoral College. So I don't think anything has drastically changed. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Things have changed. The map is more favorable today for Kamala Harris than it was a month ago for Joe Biden, which means it's less favorable for Donald Trump. But he's not being crushed. I mean, his poll numbers aren't collapsing. Hers are just rising. So I wouldn't say panic.
No, but there has been a steady trend towards Kamala Harris. If the election's fought on personality and vibes, Kamala Harris is going to win. The election is fought on inflation, immigration, crime, foreign threats, then the Republicans most likely will win. Steve Saylor wrote a great column this week for Tacky Mag talking about 3 decades ago, California political legend Willie Brown introduced Donald Trump to his latest mistress, Kamala Harris. When Trump gave Willie and his entourage a lift on his jet so he could ask advice from the expert himself on how to get around California's notorious regulations on a hotel deal that Trump was pondering. So Trump made the not unreasonable snap judgment that Willie's nice-looking young beige woman of indeterminate ethnicity with a Hindu first name must be a South Asian. Years later, when Trump would see headlines celebrating Kamala as the first black woman, he didn't wonder what the full story must be and how he'd gotten it not quite right. So Kamala's racial ancestry is half Tamil Brahmin on her Indian mother's side, and on her father's side, all right, he's about half white and about half Jamaican. All right, he's mulatto Jamaican. That makes Kamala about 1/4 white and about 1/4 black and about half Tamil Brahmin. So her Stanford economics professor father would likely be called white in Jamaica and black in America. So Trump being Trump, he assumes that his memory was perfect and therefore she must be pulling a fast one. And so that's why you got Trump's remarks at the Black Journalists Convention that, oh, I didn't realize that she was black until recently. Now, Trump was wrong. Kamala has always identified as both Asian, Indian, and black, and she used her blackness to get into Hastings Law School via affirmative action. Now, his accusation was greeted with shrieks of racism from part black female journalists like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the daughter of a white woman. Like people like Nicole Hannah-Jones of the longtime New York Times owe their jobs to affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion, favoritism, based on the one-drop rule under which their claims to the professional privileges of blackness are considered as indisputable as Michelle Obama's. So Americans adopted the one-drop rule, so nothing could ever possibly be done about the injustices of Kamala and herself benefiting from being considered black. After all, it's not like blacks have any say in American racial policy over the past 2 generations. Now, reality, the historic African-American nation is strikingly homogeneous except for its elite, which tends to be much more white by nature and nurture, and or much more foreign black like Obama and half white. Or in the case of Kamala, right, you've got tiny little bit of foreign black and a whole bunch of foreign non-black elite. So much so that none of her ancestors arrived in America until about 65 years ago. So it's interesting that the black community tends to be dominated in political terms by people who can pass for white. Now, many black elites only qualify for affirmative action under the one-drop rule, right? If the average African-American is about 80% black, right, what percentage of the latest generation of black elites would reach that percentage? All right, not so many. So extending affirmative action to all who claim the privileges of blackness is a winning political strategy for some, because there is no finite limit to what whites are expected to sacrifice. So the more nominal the black, the merrier. By contrast, many groups restrict their membership. So we see American Indians often carefully patrolling the boundaries of their race. In 2011, the Cherokee Nation expelled 2,800 of its members for being too black, and that left bigger casino checks for the rest. Now, Trump supporters on Twitter assumed that Donald Trump must be playing 4D chess to win over the black male vote. And Steve Saylor says, my theory after 40 years of observing Donald Trump is that he's neither a racist nor a genius. He's an extremely self-confident egomaniac with a decent nose for sniffing out when something doesn't quite smell right about the current orthodoxy, while he lacks the command of facts and the precision of thought to articulate what he's sensing. Most of the hatred that he elicits is because, in his clumsy, ham-handed way, he's onto something. So what Trump has semi-grasped is that Kamala's coronation as the first black candidate for president of the United States, the nominee of a major party, is exposing the inherent illogic of the post-1960s affirmative action era. So he's raising a question that will become increasingly relevant in a mixed-race America. Right? How black do you have to be to get black affirmative action? All right, Kamala Harris only got the vice presidential nod from Joe Biden due to her being 1/4 black and 100% woman. So Kamala Harris's candidacy is a lot like Barack Obama's. All right, Barack Obama was half non-black. Kamala is 75% non-black. but she gets to claim that she's black. So for how long will this persist among blacks and among Democrats for their elites, right? What about right now, if you're 1/4 black in Kamala's case, where does this process end when you're 1/8 black, 1/16, 1/32nd, 1/64? So Trump senses there's one issue here that might unite the white, black, and red historic nations of America in opposition to ceding rule of the United States to an Obama-Kamala-style global elite ruling class whose claim to power over America is justified by just a smidgen of sacred black blood. All right, black Americans weren't terribly enthusiastic about Barack Obama, didn't really consider him black until it appeared that he was on a winning ticket. All right, let's get a burst here from Fox.
He was asked about abortion, disciplined. The press finally did get under his skin, of course, when they asked about crowd sizes.
Are you worried at all about the size of Harris's crowds?
Oh, give me a break. Listen, I had 107,000 people in New Jersey. You didn't report it. I'm so glad you asked. What did she have yesterday? 2,000 people? If I ever had 2,000 people, you'd say my campaign is finished. It's so dishonest, the press. When she gets 1,500 people, and I saw it yesterday on ABC, where they said, oh, the crowd was so big. I have 10 times, 20 times, 30.
This boastful side of Trump is not going to win him any voters. Right? It's not an attractive personality trait. Let other people sing your praises. This is a bad strategy for going through life.
30 times the crowd size. And no, they never say the crowd was big. That's why I'm always saying turn around the cameras. I'm so glad you asked that. I think it's so terrible when you say, well, she has 1,500 people, 1,000 people, and they talk about, oh, the enthusiasm. Let me tell you, we have the enthusiasm.
In the last week, Trump's done a rally, Fox and Friends, radio, podcasts. Today, he held an hour-long news conference, and the media accused him.
Yeah, so yes, Donald Trump was responding to a question about Kamala's crowd sizes, but first of all, you could make the obvious point that there's absolutely no connection between large crowd sizes and winning an election. And two, he just turned it into another long series of boasts about himself that does not go down well unless you're already a supporter.
Of laziness.
You have not had a public campaign event for nearly a week now. Tomorrow you'll be in Montana, which is not a swing state. Some of your allies have expressed concern that you're not taking this very seriously, particularly.
So it'll be much more effective if Donald Trump admitted to some weaknesses, right? He's not necessarily lazy, but he's not a particularly hard worker either. So, all right, this is Frank Luntz, and I think he made a lot of good points here.
It's a very special time, and this organization is in a very particularly...
Okay, he's talking about no labels.
Tim Walz is a good campaigner. He is very easy on the stump. He has a smile and a all-encompassing embrace. People like him both privately and publicly. She has chemistry.
Okay, so I think a whole bunch of the right-wing talking points are bogus, such as this stolen valor issue. So Tim Walz has exaggerated his military service, but the Republicans are not going to win by going with the stolen valor, right? He's been sloppy in his phrasing. I don't think stolen valor is going to be a winning issue. And complaining about process, anything that you do as a Republican politician here that distracts from a focus on immigration, crime, inflation, right? Those are winning issues, right? Republicans are going to win on those issues. Going after Tim Walz for stolen valor, right? That's not going to win the Republicans the election.
With him, that's clear. But in terms of a political pick, I still wonder, if you're governor of Minnesota, you do not have an impact on any other state except Minnesota. Minnesota has been consistently a Democratic state forever. So she's specifically saying, I don't want Pennsylvania, I want the governor of Minnesota. So that really shocked me. And it makes me wonder why she made that decision.
Right. Now, that is key. All right. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, she wins the election in all likelihood. All right. 90% chance that if Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, she wins the election. 90% chance that if she loses Pennsylvania, she loses the election. there is a popular governor of Pennsylvania who is smart, who is effective, who is moderate. Right? It seems like every electoral winning strategy would have you pick the governor of Pennsylvania, and she doesn't. Right? Coming with Tim Walz, he doesn't bring anything to the ticket. Right? Minnesota's already in the Democrats' camp. It's fascinating when people choose someone who is so much less effective than them just to shore up their own insecurity.
And as I said, brutal honesty. Walz is a great campaigner, but he does not bring Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's not.
It's a little bit like Joe Biden, like Barack Obama choosing Joe Biden. Right? Joe Biden's not an impressive politician. Right? Barack Obama was an impressive politician. Joe Biden was not. Right? But by choosing a mediocrity, he had safety. Nobody would want his removal so that Joe Biden could take his place. There's nothing that Joe Biden was going to do that would make Barack Obama feel insecure. And then Joe Biden chose another mediocrity to be his vice president, all right, Kamala Harris, as opposed to a George W. Bush who selected a formidable, all right, a much more intelligent vice president than himself, Dick Cheney. So I co-hosted a show for almost 2 years with a co-host who was much smarter than I was, who had much more presence and charisma than I did, who was much more rhetorically gifted than I did, who could set the mood and the tone much more powerfully than I did, right? I was glad to bring on Kevin Michael Grace. I was glad that he was smarter, more rhetorically gifted than I was. But Kamala Harris, right, she just seems to be way too insecure to bring over someone who, because he's younger and sharper, makes her look frumpy, and because he's more serious, more intelligent, and more gifted, right, it makes her sound ditzy. Let's get another burst here from Fox.
And it worked. Smoked her out of her little hole today. And here's how the media covered it. Watch.
She's also got this stalker going around from city to city like a hangdog ex-husband trying to find her.
J.D. Vance is doing a great job on the stump. Like, J.D. Vance has found his voice. He's found his self-confidence. He's rocking it out on the campaign trail.
So I trust the Secret Service, but I'm glad that she's got Tim Walz there too. He's on it.
Yeah, it is so weird, Lindsay. It is so weird that, like, Trump is playing golf somewhere while J.D. Vance is, like, stalking the vice president and saying weird stuff to reporters. Like, he's not helping to make it himself not seem weird.
Is Walz her running mate or her security blanket? I mean, if anyone gets near Harris, they're a stalker. This is not high school, ladies. This is the great American Republic. She's not a woman at a bar. She's running to be the leader of the free world. But first you can't talk to Kamala, and now you can't go near her. She's not a princess. Trump's not running against Meghan Markle. They sent De Niro out to troll Trump at the...
Okay, let's get a little bit more analysis from
Now truly up
Frank
for
Luntz.
grabs. And I'm wondering whether Josh Shapiro's faith and his public support for Israel had any impact.
Okay, so Josh Shapiro talks about his faith, but that's about the most un-Jewish thing in the world. Jews very rarely talk about their faith. Judaism, Jewish identity has almost nothing to do with faith. All right, faith gets very little emphasis in even religious Jewish life. All right, the emphasis is on action. It's not on faith. That's a Christian thing.
On her decision, not just for the Pennsylvania electorate, but for the Michigan electorate, which is the largest concentration of Muslim voters in America. By the same token, Donald Trump's trashing of the pick, calling him Walz the worst vice president ever, that he would be. It's interesting because he's been saying that Harris is the worst vice president ever, and Trump is simply incapable without making a comment that doesn't have some sort of extreme reference as part of it.
This is true. Like, the extreme puts downs by Donald Trump, aren't winning him any points. Unless you're already in his camp, you're going to find it distasteful. Is Ben Shapiro reformed? No, he's an Orthodox Jew. Elliott Blatt says it seems like Trump could trim a few aspects from the more obnoxious side of his personality, pick up a point or two. Trump needs to pretend he's already won the election, give concrete advice about how country should be run. This would be a sharp contrast to Kamala's retarded babbling.
2 weeks ago, this was Donald Trump's election to lose. Today, Trump is losing it. And so I'm not critical of the Harris pick, which he could have done better. And that's the question I would ask all of you who are participating right now to think about, not to ask me about, but to think about, why did she do this?
Well, Frank, let me ask you about.
You can have your hand on the trigger, just like they do in Jeopardy. If it's good enough for Alex Trebek, it's good enough for this group. I think that she wanted to ensure that there was no negative backlash and that Josh Shapiro.
Right. The more insecure you are, the less you're going to be able to ride the waves of life. Right. Life throws turbulence at you. And the more turbulence that you can handle without losing it, right, the more mature you are. And so it shows a tremendous insecurity and right, lack of maturity on Kamala Harris's part, that she seems to have a pretty low threshold for turbulence, as opposed to Donald Trump, who can handle astronomical amounts of turbulence. Josh Shapiro is a conservative Jew. So he has a Jewish day school background. So he's more observant, seemingly, than probably 80-90% of conservative Jews.
Because he's been so vocally supportive of Israel. And this has been a split within the Democratic Party. Last night, Cori Bush, who's been openly supportive of the Palestinian cause, was defeated in the primary. It's the second person defeated who's part of the squad. And the squad is very hostile to continued military exchange in the Middle East. And I want to be careful because Governor Walz, she has avoided that. So I think that that was a major part of her consideration.
Frank, you did a focus group recently with some really fascinating.
Most likely reasons for this group of people, which is so essential. And it's why Harris has completely closed the gap with Trump, and in some polls is now leading. And I think the momentum's on her side. Number one, it was a vote against Joe Biden. It was the feeling that he was simply too old to do the job for 4 more years. Number two is that they never heard from him a detailed plan of action for the future, that he was just talking about the last 4 years and talking about why Trump is bad for democracy without putting forward where he wanted to go. And number three, Harris has been energetic, regardless of what you think of her. When she takes the stage, when she enters a room, there's passion and there's energy and there's excitement. I'm not defending her as the choice in all of this. I neither defend nor criticize Trump or Harris. It's simply what the voters have to say, and that's what this is a focus on. And the voters saw a newfound engagement. And so if you're a younger voter and you were turned off by the 77-year-old and 80-year-old, you like the fact that Harris is more energetic. If you're African-American, you like the fact that she's talking about issues that affect you. However, if you are a union member, this is a much more difficult sale, because union members who have been supporting Trump to a degree that Republicans never get, those numbers may even have gone up since this election, since Harris has emerged as the Democratic nominee. But make no mistake, Trump's advantage with the Republican convention after that ended is gone. It is wiped away. And if the election were held today, I actually believe that Harris would beat Trump.
Michigan has the most Muslim Americans in the country. Well, Pennsylvania has the 5th most.
She could have taken Pennsylvania off the table by choosing Shapiro. She could have taken Michigan off the table by choosing Whitmer. She could have taken North Carolina off the table by choosing Cooper. She had a number of different choices of specific states that would have changed the outcome in those states, and chose not to do it, which is fine. Al Gore added to the Clinton ticket back.
Frank Luntz is a very effective communicator, but it's absurd that he wants to be known as Dr. Frank Luntz, right? He's not a medical doctor. If you're not a medical doctor, wanting to be known as doctor is weird. But he's very compelling when he speaks.
Back in 1992 by giving Americans the first baby boom ticket ever. And you've had presidents that have chosen vice presidents because of the theme, what they want to communicate. If this campaign is about inflation and immigration, Donald Trump wins. If it's about the attributes of the candidates, Kamala Harris wins.
Right. That's a great point. Right. If this campaign is fought on foreign policy, threats from abroad, immigration, crime, and inflation, right, the Republicans will win. If it's fought over vibes and personality, then Kamala Harris will win.
Wins. Trump is disliked as a person, but his administration has a favorable evaluation. Harris represents an administration that is not liked, but she has the energy and excitement the voters do want. And I don't believe Trump has the sophistication to understand this. So his goal in this process has been to demonize her. That's a mistake. It should be to talk about what's happened at the border and talk about what's happened in the economy. Her goal now is to show that Donald Trump is weird. It's the right tactic, but it's the wrong strategy. Weird is not something that people vote on. And just because Democrats have been saying it doesn't mean that the average American believes it. I think both campaigns are miscalibrated right now and are not understanding the electorate. And so this election, quite frankly, is up for grabs. And the only thing I'd say to you is that the third party candidate, Robert Kennedy Jr., has become completely irrelevant in this. And you're watching his numbers drop 12, 11, 10%. They're now down to 4% or 5%. And they will continue to deteriorate as everyone focuses on these two party candidates.
Yeah. And of course, it's also the question as to whether he'll be on the ballot in the end. I want to invite people to raise their hands now.
Believes that they have the solutions. And so No Labels is in that sweet spot of being able to work with the Capitol, are not happening in committee meetings, and it enables people to hear alternative points of view and then act on them. This is what No Labels does in an incredibly effective way. Now, make no mistake, I said this was going to be, I'm not asking whether Israel is the most significant issue to you, but how many of you care about the issue of Israel in your vote? How many of you would say that it matters physically? Raise your hands.
Right. So for about 3% of Americans, foreign policy is a top consideration in this national presidential election. And in a time of crisis, such as after October 7, 2023, when Israel was invaded by Hamas fighters, right, then it might rise up to about 5%. But overwhelmingly, this election will not be decided by foreign policy.
Okay, that's most of you. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Because it's not just about Israel or the Palestinians or Hamas or October 7th or what's happening in Gaza. It's also about the U.S. position in global affairs. How active are we going to be in demanding responsibility from Iran, in insisting that Russia not invade its neighbors just because it wants to, or saying to China that Taiwan is a separate entity and you cannot take it over? Israel, on the specifics, was a victim of what happened on October 7th. And what's happening in Gaza is a tragedy, no matter where you stand on the issue. But this is all being driven by Iran. It's being funded by Iran. It's being coordinated by Iran. And so the issue is much more significant. And as I keep this morning, it's a longer answer than I should give you, but I got a text this morning from one of the top sportscasters in America talking about how frustrated he was that Harris is not being held more accountable by the media, that she's not willing to face the press. We'll see if that becomes an issue in this campaign, but that is a brilliant question. And the answer in the end is only about 3% of America. But among those 3%, they break for Trump 2-1. Next question.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. For those 3% of Americans for whom foreign policy is a top issue, they break for Trump 2-1. So if the campaign is fought over foreign policy, inflation, crime, immigration, then Trump's going to win.
In terms of he's a great campaigner. And he's going to add,
Right, talking about Tim Walz, he is good. All right, he's not self-conscious. He is a great campaigner.
Bring about, there's more joy on the Democratic side than the Republican side. There's more positivity on the Democratic side. Sure, they've got their criticisms of Trump, and they're sharp, and they're direct. But there's less of what they don't want and more of what they do want on the Democratic side than on the Republican side. And Vance's comments from several years ago, and I realize as I'm answering your question, and for the last half hour, I realize that I probably sound like I'm pro-Harris, and I want to emphasize, I'm trying to give you the straight answer. In the end, voters tend to vote for the more optimistic candidate. In the end, voters tend to choose the candidate that gives them a vision of the future. And those would be Harris. Her challenge is the record of Biden-Harris on inflation is not good. And voters don't look at it as a single year where inflation's come down over the last year. They look at the last 4 years compared to Donald Trump. Her record on immigration is not good. They don't look at what's happening right now. They look at the last 4 years. And Trump's advantage is on his administration's perceptions versus Harris. But the reason why she chose Walz is that he is a happy warrior and that he appeals to the same people that J.D. Vance appeals to. And he hasn't made statements about calling women without children cat women. That's not helpful. And the thing I'd say to you, and I know that I'm going to focus on what Trump has said. And by the way, his big strategy during the debate was to say, I never said that. But the answer is, the truth is he did. All the things that Biden would say Trump said, he did. But you have to be able to show it. In fact, I'm going to give you the Harris strategy. I would invite the news media to a debate. If Donald Trump says you're not going to show up on September 10th, you bring Trump virtual to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You put him up on the screen, a screen that's 3 times bigger than life, 5 times bigger than life, and you play his greatest hits. Then you push pause and then you respond to him. All the insults, play them and say, Mr. Trump, this is your words. And here's how I respond. The media would eat it up. The center of Trump moved to the center, but Trump is only speaking to his base because he only knows his base. There are plenty of examples. And by the way, Ryan, I can still do 2 more.
Okay.
Guaranteed than Joe Biden's. But the reason why you're now actually losing is because of you, sir. Your attributes, how you carry yourself.
Right. This is Frank Luntz talking to Donald Trump if he were his advisor.
And the public's desire to get away from that. If he doesn't change his tune, she doesn't need to move because he's only talking to people who already agree with him. And that is a surefire way to lose this election.
Okay, got some other links lined up here. All right, Andrew Klavan talking to Megyn Kelly.
Or they actually think of it as creating this fantasy atmosphere in which we're supposed to vote. I mean, look at this, Megyn. 1 week.
Right, it is weird that Kamala Harris is all about the joy, because that's never been a word that people have used with Kamala Harris before, but it's only because of the situation, all right? When you've been saddled with Joe Biden as your nominee, then Democrats are understandably depressed, and only in reaction to that situation and him finally stepping down and you get another candidate, then yes, there's going to be an overflow of joy. There's nothing inherent about Kamala Harris that brings joy, though she is telegenic, right? She does have youthful energy, and compared to who she's set against, right, she can look attractive. So against a Josh Shapiro, she doesn't look so attractive, right? She looks frumpy, but next to a Tim Walz, she looks great.
We're being told that Joe Biden is the smartest guy in the room. He's sharp. He's on top of it. He hasn't lost any of his skill. He's better. This is the best Joe Biden we've ever had. The next day, 2 days after his debate with Trump, suddenly the guy is a drooling fool who's got to step down, who's dragging the entire party with him. Then he steps down and he's George Washington. Oh my God, the incredible selflessness with which he stood aside. I'm getting whiplash at this point. And then Kamala Harris steps up, and the same people who have just spent all this time lying to us once, lying to us twice, lying to us a third time, suddenly, oh, she's so lovable. She's such a competent person. And she's moderate. She's not far left at all. She doesn't believe any of the things she said. The one thing that does not exist is video or audio of Kamala Harris saying, I no longer believe all the things that I said and did before. And I actually separate myself from the Joe Biden policies that I've been supporting all this time. And I take back the fact that I lied about him being the sharpest tack in the room.
Okay,
so
let's bring Elliott Blatt onto the show. Elliott, what's going on, man?
Bro, blessings, bro. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, loud and clear.
Okay, bro. I'm almost embarrassed that it falls to me to sort of articulate the correct strategy Trump needs to follow. I'm but an amateur and but a very unskilled, maladroit amateur at that. But I know the winning strategy, and I need it out there.
Okay, let's speak to America.
Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Trump needs to moderate. He needs to go towards the center. He needs to clip off a lot of the bombast that sort of inflames his opponents, right?
Yeah.
He needs to seem presidential. He needs to speak presidential. He needs to basically embody the fact that he's already won the election and that he is, in fact, the president in waiting. He needs to make policy statements. He needs to dress in a dark blue suit with a white shirt and a red tie. He needs to do up Mar-a-Lago as if it's the Oval Office already. He just needs to seem like the president, right?
Yeah.
The surrogates, however, need to go on the attack, and they need to attack viciously. They need to get incredibly aggressive. They need to point out the elephant in the room. They need to say the unsayable and really drive the point home. They need to tear Kamala to shreds. This sort of yin-yang strategy is just a decisive winner. Trump wins by 10 points. Here I am in my apartment in San Francisco, and I'm directing the court district.
I like it. I would say just focus on crime, inflation, protection of the borders, immigration. And getting us out of useless wars overseas.
Yes, and Trump needs to demonstrate his command of the issues, and he needs to speak at length, and he needs to invite the media. And if he can just not say anything too bombastic, he could be a little bit sensitive to the delicate sensibilities of the swing voter, he can win them over, right? And this will be such a stark contrast to Kamala's retarded babbling. and he just wins in a walk. Am I oversimplifying, bro?
I think you're exaggerating how effective that would be. Meaning, I think that's a winning strategy. I don't think there's any way that Donald Trump could win the national vote by 10 percentage points. I think that Donald Trump has a maximum ceiling of about 50% of the vote. That he is alienated half of America. But I think you're articulating a winning strategy. I just heard something smart today by Andrew Klavan, who I'm about to play an excerpt from. He said, if DEI is a good thing, then why would Kamala Harris not want to embrace being the DEI candidate?
Yeah, that's been a meme for a long time now. And yeah, but Trump doesn't need to do that. His surrogates need to do it, right? Yeah. He needs to stay away from anything vaguely suggestive of racism or sexism. He needs to be the policy bro. He just needs to be the calm, competent pilot of the aircraft who's been there before and deserves to be there again. And let all of his surrogates do the nastiness.
Yeah.
And he can. So, all right. It's amazing to me that Kamala's even in the conversation. I look at her, I hear the voice, I hear the cackling, I hear the nonsense, the word salad. Why are we even talking? Why are we even having this conversation? It blows my mind. It simply blows my mind.
Well, I mean, it doesn't blow my mind. I can understand why someone who leans Democrat looks at news coverage and vibes with Kamala. So it doesn't blow my mind.
Okay. Well, obviously, all right. So I want to shift gears slightly.
Yes, sir.
So I watched, I think Halperin yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, possibly the day before. But Laura Loomer
Laura Loomer, wasn't that great?
I fucking love her. I think she is matured, and I think she's a real force. I think she is someone to watch. I think she acquitted herself masterfully. And then I've been sort of mildly a critic of hers, but I didn't realize how young she is. I don't think she's even 30 yet. She's very, very talented for somebody of her age. And I've given her a new appraisal, and I'm now a Laura fan.
Well, I started following her on Twitter, but for me, what came across was how self-defeating her personality was. It was just so abrasive and defensive that it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I respect some of her work, but what stood out to me was the self-defeating, abrasive personality. She said in a prominent Washington Post profile that she's all in for Donald Trump because she's got nothing else going on in her life.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But I think
wasn't Halperin amazing in how he handled her?
He was decorous. He was decorous, and I like Halperin, but he does a very bad job of pretending to be neutral.
He does a very bad job of what?
Pretending to be neutral.
Oh, I don't think so. Who do you think does a better job of being neutral?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But fair enough.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make the fact that I can't name somebody more neutral doesn't mean he is neutral. I mean, when I watch these streams, and I've been watching these streams like almost religiously, even though they're often quite boring, it does seem like a DNC strategy session with the occasional input of Sean Spicer.
Occasional Spicer plays a big role on the morning show, and overall, the guests. The guest commentators he has are probably at least 40% on the right. Like Newt Gingrich, John Pot Haaretz.
That's not a ringing endorsement. That's not a ringing endorsement to my point, though. I mean, there's 60%. There's 60% Kamala, 60% on the left, and I'll take those numbers at face value. But true true neutrality would mean 50-50, but it just seems like there's the elephant in the room on that stream, that Kamala is a babbling idiot and nobody will say anything about it.
Well, no, they talk about word salad. I mean, babbling idiot. You're departing from the peace, love, and understanding ethos of the Mark Halperin show. And I think Halperin is right that the Democrats have been the primary party in the news for the past 6 weeks, right? Ever since the debate, right? It's the Democrats who have been in crisis. So therefore, it would make sense that he has more Democratic strategists and Democrats on to talk about it, because it's the Democrats who've been in crisis. It's the Republicans who've been much more settled. So that's why I think there's been much more emphasis on the Democrats, because they've been the party in crisis. But go ahead.
Well, Halperin, but if you notice, and I hate to obsess on Halperin. I mean, I guess I quote unquote like him. I mean, I'm glad the stream exists and so forth. But you'll notice that his pushback, he doesn't push back on Kamala supporters as vigorously as he pushes back on Trump supporters. Would you say that's fair?
I'm not sure. He is part of he is his social class, right, and his profession are overwhelmingly on the left. So I think he does a phenomenal job being fair. And he talks about how the media is completely in the tank for Kamala. New York Times, Politico, Washington Post, etc., just completely in the tank for Kamala, that they covered up Joe Biden's senility for years, that they're gaslighting the American people. He has had some devastating critiques.
Perfect example. He has, what's his name? Joe Scarborough, or he used to. I haven't seen him yet.
Yeah.
He has Joe Scarborough on that stream early on, maybe on a daily basis. And Joe Scarborough was one of these people, with as sharp as attack claims. Now, why, in a fair world, don't you think at the very least Halperin should sort of take him to task for that? But even better yet, just not have him on the stream. Like, if you're really about neutrality and journalistic integrity, that's what you would do. But he doesn't challenge Scarborough.
No,
he
doesn't.
Anybody that says sharp as attack, to me, is no longer a journalist.
No, everyone gets things wrong. So Joe Scarborough is in the top 10 or top 20 most influential political commentators in the United States today. His morning TV show, Morning Joe, is the favored TV show among political elite. And Halperin does not try to embarrass his guests. Like, he could have brought up 50 different highly embarrassing things that Laura Loomer has said and done, and he didn't do it. He doesn't bring up the stupidest, most embarrassing things that his guests have said. It's not that type of show, right? He gets the elite on, and he is friendly and extends good faith to them, and he doesn't try to embarrass them.
But we're comparing apples and oranges here. Laura Loomer is a, sort of marginal blogger who basically tells the truth, except in some,
awful times, but she doesn't.
She has some hysterical, exceptions to this.
Yeah, meltdowns. Yeah.
All right. All of that notwithstanding, somebody in Joe Scarborough's position deserves more scrutiny and more rigorous challenging than does Laura Loomer. Joe Scarborough lied consistently for years about Biden's health and about his mental acuity. Okay, Laura Loomer did not. And so, if we're talking about a fair person or we're talking about a fair world, wouldn't it make sense that Scarborough is the one that deserves the pushback and deserves the grilling?
No, because it's not that kind of show. Mark Halperin doesn't grill anyone who comes on that show, right? Joe Scarborough has a morning show, and for anyone who has done a morning show, you are just perennially sleep deprived, right? It's absolutely exhausting to do. a morning show. And Joe Scarborough gets Newt Gingrich and John Potter Haaretz and Joe Scarborough and other members of the political elite on the show because they know they're not going to be grilled, that they are invited to contribute their opinion and their expertise. But Mark Halperin is not going to dredge up the most embarrassing things that they've said and confront them. You could bring up 150 embarrassing things about Newt Gingrich, but you're never going to get him on the show. So the people who come on his show, they're chill, right? They're kicked back. They're relaxing at home. They're having a civil, cordial, friendly conversation, and there's comparatively little attempt at scoring points against other people on the show or on the panel. So it's a convivial mood. It's not a meet the press grilling.
Okay, I can accept that. I can see your point. I will reconsider my views in light of what you said. I guess I am still a partisan, even though I pledged to myself that I wasn't going to emotionally engage in the election until after October 7th.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, right?
But it's so much fun. All right, so let's shift gears from this slightly.
Yes.
Totally, not even slightly, totally, to a little incident that happened to me today. And I'll recount the facts of the incident, and you tell me how I performed.
Okay.
Okay. So I went to Whole Foods. So Whole Foods is like a mile drive from there. I drive to Whole Foods, and I go into the parking lot. In the parking lot, a big section of the parking lot is closed because there's these giant trucks, these giant, strange-looking trucks in the parking lot. So the available spots have been basically cut in half. And as a result, I'm not able to find a parking spot. And so I leave the parking lot and I drive, a block away to a neighborhood. And now, I don't know if they've done this in LA, but in San Francisco, they've sort of blocked off certain roads as being pedestrian friendly.
Yes.
Have they done this in LA as well?
I think they're going to do more of it. I think they've done some of it.
Okay, so I turned onto one of these streets, and it's all decked out in this signage that says this is a COVID blocked off zone, no cars allowed. Does that faze me? Not in the least. I turned right onto this quote unquote. It's only available to abutters, people who live on the street itself. So basically, I broke the rules, if not the law, by turning onto this street.
Yes.
In defiance of all of this signage that's up there. And so I get there, and as soon as I get there, so it's hard to explain, but the right lane was blocked, so I had to swerve into the left lane to evade the sort of plastic barricades.
Yep.
Right? So I had to turn into the left lane and then back over to the right lane and then continue down the street. And so I turned into the left lane, and there's this woman at the other end of the block. We're talking a solid, 200-300 yards away. And she starts going ballistic. She starts waving her hands and shouting and so forth. And then I turn over we are so far apart, there is not even the vaguest suggestion that I could even collide with her, right? So I turned back into the right lane, the appropriate lane. And then she's still going bananas, like waving her hands and raving and ranting. And so I finally drive up to her and I stop and I roll down the window and I said, "Is there a problem?" And then she starts shrieking at me. "I have the right of way. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. You did this, blah, blah, blah. You're jeopardizing, the whole thing." And she's got this particular look, which is this sort of late 40s, mid 50s, dressed in denim, grayish curly hair. And she's just got that angry look, and she's shrieking at me a blue streak. And I'm like, oh my God.
Wait, was she on foot? Was she in a car, on a bike?
She might have been on a bike. I think she was on foot, but she might have been on a bike.
Okay.
But the thing is the street sort of blocked off so that pedestrians can use the actual roadway and not the sidewalk. As if the sidewalks are congested. You know, the whole thing, the whole premise of this road closure thing is retarded. Theoretically, there's some relationship to global warming, which is absolutely retarded. I don't want to go into that. But the fact of the matter, she was in the roadway proper in a block that had been closed off. So,
and you were not supposed to be where you were.
You
were not supposed to be driving.
I was definitely.
So you know where I stand on this.
Delicto, bro. I was nakedly violating the law.
Yes.
Because I needed to park. And so anyway, she starts shrieking at me.
Yes.
And she's shrieking, and I can just see that she's just going bananas. Now, I could have just driven by her and just called it a day. But I didn't. I stopped the car and I rolled down the window and I said, "Is there a problem?" Right? And then she just lays into me about how I have the right of way. And then I'm blocking her, and she was incensed, right? And I said, okay, I can be the bigger man, just remain quiet. And or I could just express my feelings, you know, in a very unvarnished way. It's like a yin and a yang. There was no gray area. So what did I do? What did I do?
I have no idea.
Dude, I laid into her. I shrieked I just screamed at her. I said, "Fuck you, you stupid retard, blah, blah, blah." I just laid into it. It was like this infernal rage just emitted from my mouth, almost without any filtering. It was like this subconscious eruption. And I didn't even know it was existing with me. And I just screamed at her. And I didn't even feel guilty. Because usually when I do shit like that, I feel kind of guilty. But I didn't this time. I just felt I felt justified. So I don't know. So what do you think how do you think I played this?
I don't think you should have been on that street. I don't think you should have yelled at the woman, and I think it was a really bad mistake for you to shriek at her.
Yeah, I kind of figured you'd say that. But at the same time, after I was done, I was driving around the block. I was laughing. It felt good, bro. It really felt good.
Right, you were trolling in real life. You were flaming in real life.
I was trolling in real. No, had this been a giant, Wakandans, I would say, I wouldn't have behaved that way. And
because you know that she might have shanked you.
Exactly. So I picked a very weak target, and then I started thinking about that, and I started feeling bad about it. But it's just very interesting how sort of power relationships frame your behavior.
Oh yeah, if I'm crossing the street and someone almost runs over me, I will start screaming at the driver. But when I notice that they're young African American males, I stop yelling.
Exactly.
Pretty much anyone else, I will yell. But as soon as I see the young African American males, I shut up.
Because they're ready to raise the stakes to a really
there's a higher probability that they're ready to raise the stakes.
Yeah. So these are all the little subtle calculations you need to do.
I remember once there was this vehicle in front of me that was slow, and I laid on the horn, and then the driver in front of me got out, and it was my therapist.
That's awesome. So were you on your way to a session, or is this just a coincidence?
No. It was completely unrelated. It was just, I was embarrassed.
Well, we soldier on, bro. We soldier on. Well, I already told you my sort of incident last year when I had a similar situation.
Yeah, and how did you deal with the streets being blocked off for the marathon? Wait, don't you I almost always feel bad. Not bad in the sense of regret. I just don't like the feelings that I get after I scream at someone. It throws me out of my equilibrium for longer than 20 minutes. So you, however, sounds like you genuinely felt happy afterward.
I agree with you. Most of the times when I lose my cool, I feel very embarrassed and I feel a sense of regret. But this time I just felt energized and enthused.
Okay, interesting.
It's like, and that's why I'm sort of bringing it up because, you know, I do try not to lose my cool. I consider it, you know, a failure when I do so. And then I was just kind of interrogating. I was giggling afterwards. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, why was I giggling? You know, it wasn't really, I could have.
Okay, wait, I got something more important. What do you think about the dynamic of not choosing a co-host or a partner because they are smarter than you, because they make you look silly or slow or frumpy by comparison? To me, it's striking that Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz because in comparison to Tim Walz, right, she looks great and she doesn't come across as a ditz, as opposed to if she has a co-host like Josh Shapiro, she's going to come across ditzy and frumpy. And so often in life, people don't want to bring someone aboard who's going to challenge them. And this might even apply for many men who don't want to date a woman who's going to be particularly challenging. She brings a lot to the table, but it's going to require a lot of effort. And so I've been quite lazy in much of my womanizing, and I've never dated for long a high maintenance woman. While friends of mine have dated high maintenance women and married high maintenance women, and they've been up to the task of pleasing a high maintenance woman, and it seems to have made them better men. So any thoughts on choosing a partner who might challenge you, who as opposed to choosing someone who's just going to be an easier ride?
Well, there's a saying about this. Can I lay it on you?
Yes.
Okay. A's hire B's.
Yeah.
B's hire B's and C's. Yeah, and then if I may quote from the 48 Laws of Power, which is the book which I know you detest, even though you haven't read it, the first rule, I believe, I'm recalling correction, is never outshine the master. Masters do not want to be outshone. They want a subordinate. They don't want somebody that's going to challenge them. So yes, I believe that was at play. I believe your analysis about Kamala is correct. She knows she's a pretender, and it oozes from her every pore. So it doesn't surprise me at all. I think you're absolutely correct. This is just part of human nature.
Now, what's your experience? I've worked for people who weren't concerned that I might outshine them, but it was always important that I knew my place with any boss. I was happy to have Kevin Michael Grace as my co-host, knowing that he was going to outshine me, and I didn't stop that arrangement because I just got tired of him outshining me. It's just that I wasn't happy after 18 months or so. But what's your experience? What have you observed in this area?
I definitely recognize a tendency, but, and this, I'm trying to say this without sounding conceited, right? But I would love to hire somebody at my level. It would take a huge burden off me.
Yeah.
And the fact is, in today's day and age, we're not really equipped to pay somebody that's would be a peer of mine. So we end up hiring a lot of junior people, and we pay a price in certain ways. So it's not something I would personally engage in. Hiring somebody at your level or even higher would just relieve some responsibility from me, which I would love. So, but I don't know. That's kind of a mushy answer.
What about dating, say, the high maintenance woman, so a woman who brings a lot to the table, but you're going to have to up your game?
Yeah. Part of me is up for the game, but it's like, what's his name? Kip? Is that his name? The guy?
Yeah, Kip. Yeah.
So Kip
Dating
had a
10.
great story about his 10. That was a very interesting story. I'm very cognizant of that dynamic now, right? Like, I don't have the energy to sort of, entertain a 10 or even a.
But
8.
did you ever? But was there ever a time when you were willing to go to great effort to keep dating a high value?
Well, when I was young and dumb, yeah, sure. But
okay, because when I was young and dumb, I was not willing to go to great effort. I was willing to go to moderate effort.
Yeah.
I mean, how much have you spent on women that you were dating? Not a great deal.
Too much, but nothing terrible.
Right.
A lot more than I would now. I would recognize the return, the likelihood. I'm much more cautious with my money now than when I was younger.
Any updates?
I would do that. I would apply the real, true cost-benefit analysis, and I wouldn't do what I used to do.
Any updates on the con artist mother-daughter team?
Yes, indeed. You up for it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I invited so every year, our company, we have a party at her parents' mansion in Atherton. So if you know the Bay Area, you know that Atherton is the home to many palatial estates where Silicon Valley wealth goes to abide. And so the owners of my company, the owner of my company, her parents, they have this huge estate in Atherton, and every year there's a picnic. And the picnic is sort of broad. It was sort of just a sort of celebration of this family and all of their, various successes, and you go there. And so I invited the daughter to go, the 10, to go to this picnic with me, because it would be a great place for her to sort of expand her investment company idea. She would meet a lot of high rollers. Like, people at this party are like the net worth.
You're going to facilitate her scamming. In hopes of getting
scamming
her.
is a strong word, but the net worth at this party is like in the billions, right?
Okay.
Like, there's some heavy hitters at this place. Google, Facebook, heavy hitters go to this place. So this is the one time a year when I rub elbows with like some real heavy hitters there. Like, this one woman is like, when Biden comes to the West Coast, he goes to her house because she's a bundler for the Democratic Party, right? She's a heavy hitter. Like, there's like serious one. So anyway, so I go there. So I invite her, the daughter, the 10, to this party so she can meet some of these high rollers, right? And she sort of gave me a non-committal answer. Like, she said 80%, but the 80% turned to 0%. But then she proffered her mother as a surrogate. So at this point, I'm sort of, I'm basically committed. I have to sort of do this. So I took her mother to this party. This is this past Saturday, right? And so we go there. And so, I hate this party because I'm very uncomfortable in these sets of setting. And I'm with somebody who's I'm not terribly interested in anyway. But nevertheless, I had to sort of then invent a story like why I'm bringing this woman here.
Yeah. Oh, how embarrassing.
It's like it was like my whole gambit had just collapsed in on itself.
Oh God.
It was just brutal, and like okay, so in this part, just to example what kind of party this is, like there's like I guess there's this industry out there where you just rent people to do things to amuse children. There's lots of kids at this party. I mean, it's a pool party, right?
Yeah, got it.
And so there's like balloon tying, and tattoos, like fake tattoos, all these little things to sort of keep the kids happy, and you just sort of pay them off and the kids get in line and they get their face painted, they get balloons, they get a tattoo, and so then the adults can sort of hang out in a circle and chit chat about, being Silicon Valley elites. So anyway, one of these things was a balloon tying exhibition. Have you ever seen this?
Yes.
They tie balloons into like shapes of animals and so forth. And, oh, Jimmy, what do you want? Oh, I want an elephant. Oh, I want a doggy, and then they make a balloon out of a doggy and the kids are elated. And then I'm just looking at this guy. This guy's like, he's Asian. He's got a sleeve of tattoos up and down his leg, He looks all macho as get out, but here he is. He's just tying balloons for children. It was just sort of and I just looked at him, this guy looks like he possibly could have been in prison, but somehow he's tying balloons in the shape of animals. And I just don't know how this guy doesn't go home and start playing Russian roulette. It just seems like.
Well, at least he didn't ask a woman out and end up taking the mother.
No, he didn't. So mistakes can be made all around, but I'm sure this was like 20th on his list of priorities 10 years ago, like of career ideas, I think.
At what wage would this be respectable to you? Like if he was getting paid $50 an hour or $100 an hour?
So I had this conversation with the mother. I'm like, how much would it cost? How much would you need to be paid to do that? To tie balloons all day? And I think we arrived at $100 an hour. But he had to like plaster this smile on his face and, and like, people there's like a menu of animals, but then people would sort of order off the menu, and he would have to try to improvise.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous, but I was just trying to think like, how many people are stuck in a situation like that,
Well, how many people ask out an attractive woman and end up going out with the mother? So did you get lucky with the mother?
Lucky in the sense that nothing happened, yes. So depends on your definition of lucky.
And how well did people know you at the party?
Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Okay, so the party I would say was about 90% Asian, right? And with Asian, I'm talking about Asian and Indian. So let's say East Asian 80%, 10% Indian, and then 10% white, right?
Yep.
And so amazing, all the whites, and by whites I'm including Jews, all the whites and the Jews ended up congregating together. And then all the Asians, sort of East Asians, stayed together. And then the Indians kind of floated between the two groups. So it's just so weird to see. If you have a big sprawling pool party, people have affinities, and they eventually just, in such a semi-awkward situation, you just flow to your affinity group,
Yeah.
So I ended up in the group of the whites, and we ended up chit-chatting, and we had a bit of fun, quote unquote. But it was just amusing to see human nature just kind of assert itself subconsciously. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, that's the normal course of things.
Yeah.
Okay, bro. Good to catch up with you.
All right. Blessings.
Take
All
care.
right.
Blessings.
Peace.
All right.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.
See, and there's now no longer a structure except for you and me and Ben at the Daily Wire and Elon Musk. There's no longer a mainstream structure to call these people to account because they no longer conceive of their jobs that way. They conceive of their jobs as creating this fantasy in which who's too foolish to understand how wonderful progressivism is, will be tricked into following the progressive path. They've been doing this at least since Obama just ran an entire life. He ran an entire shadow life where he never actually cast a vote, never actually said a word that could be held against him, and then suddenly became a left-winger once he got in office. So this is the pattern. I mean, I think we should ask them, if DEI is so good, why is it bad to call Kamala Harris a DEI hire? If progressivism is so great, why do you have to convince us that Tim Walz is a moderate? If all of these things are so wonderful, if it's so wonderful to give porn to kids, to elementary school kids, why can't
Yeah, these are killer points because I noticed Democratic politicians and elites all arguing that Tim Walz is a moderate. And he was a moderate when he was in Congress, but as the governor of Minnesota, he's clearly governed from the left. Why are you deceiving on that? Like, why don't you just be proud of his left-wing behavior?
And I read the point out loud at a PTA meeting. Why is it that everything they do has to be done in secret and the fantasy has to cover it over?
The fantasy is exactly right. And it is all part of keeping her underground and not available to the press for questions or for a presser, God forbid. There was some report out today, like maybe after Labor Day, she'll give an interview. Maybe. Are you kidding me? It's August 8th. She's already been out there for 19 days and maybe she'll give an interview after. I mean, it's absurd. And the media, meantime, is leaning hard into the fabrications around the new Kamala because the fantasy must be created, this false image must be created and built up and supported. And just as J.D. Vance has to be created into a weirdo, right? Like lies about him, actual smears have to be propagated by even Tim Walz, his opponent on the VP side. But on Kamala, what they've done is they've, changed all of her weirdness into brat summer. It's cool. It's like she's the drunk wine aunt. That's what they've been telling us. The nonstop cackle, which is she just sounds like a moron. I mean, she does the cackle in response to awkward situations in which she clearly doesn't know what to say. She's stumped yet again because she doesn't seem like a very smart person. So she's stumped a lot. So she just uses the cackle. And instead, what they've done is try to rebrand this as she's joyful. That's her being such a joyful person. And by the way, not just Kamala, but Democrats. So they're parlaying it into the enthusiasm we're seeing by Democrats that they've been brought back from the dead, right? They had a nearly dead candidate who they were going to have to drag across the line weekend at Bernie style on November 5th. Now they've gotten a live person. So they actually are feeling happy, but their joy over the resurrection and her, quote, joy, which is really her cackles, does not mask the fact that 70% of the country believes we're going in the wrong direction. People can't pay their mortgages. There's a flood of illegals here, over 10 million, who are hurting people, infecting us with fentanyl and so on. And yet, just listen to the Pravda media. This is just from like 1 hour of MSNBC this morning on the joyful message.
This joy, this campaign of infectious and dynamic joy.
Tear these two very positive, joyful, energetic people down. Embrace the joy, which you see them doing. There's a lot of joy, a lot of optimism out of the box.
And the vice president has spoken to this eloquently with great joy, great enthusiasm. And joy, I think, is a great word because you can see this in Tim Walz.
This week for Democrats has been, not to overuse this word, such a joyful one.
It was literally 1 hour. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, it's infectious joy. It's like syphilis or measles or something. You just can't help catching the joy. And listen, you're right. There is some joy in the Democrat Party. The people who are going to sit this election out because they could not bring themselves to vote for a dead man are now turning up. And there's no question about this. And the Trump campaign should pay attention to it, and Republicans should pay attention to it. It's a real thing. It's not affecting Trump's popularity, which has remained just about where it was, just under 50%. That's good, and because a lot of it has to do with independents. A very small number of independents are going to determine the outcome of this election, and he's still leading with them, and those are important facts. But he has stumbled in the last week or so. It's kind of interesting, you know, he said himself that Kamala Harris was coming. Remember on the golf cart, he said we're going to have to deal with Kamala Harris, and yet he seemed kind of totally taken aback by her presence and not really known how to attack her, and that has given the Democrats a good week.
Right. So this is Republicans, analysts all over the political spectrum have noticed Donald Trump faltering in the past 2.5 weeks. Right. Here's some thoughtful analysis from Mark Halperin.
They're learned, and that makes it a little more difficult for him. At the end of the day, I think those rural voters Ben is talking about, you know, hey, they're going to see messages and ads that say, if your minor child is in school and wants to transition, you not only can't stop it, you may not know about it, or you may lose your kid. He is just too far left on culture. This race is like carved in stone. There may be only 2 or 3% at the end of the day, up or down. It's amazing that we can have these huge events, you know, debates that collapse a candidate and force him out of the race, an assassination attempt, and the race changes this much. We're still going to be here, just there before we vote. That's what this whole thing. So I think she's doing a good job of capturing the future, to answer your question. I don't understand why the Trump campaign does not say there's nothing new about Kamala Harris. We've seen this old same thing before, the same old liberal ideas that have failed us. And then say, and that's why she's trying to become something she's not. My slogan.
All right, this is Republican strategist Alex Castellanos.
Would be, don't let Kamala Harris fake you.
You know, the Missouri poll, the great poll done in the state of Missouri came out today. And it really reinforces what Alex just said. It's exactly the same race it was a month ago. I mean, Trump is up 50-49 with registered voters. Harris is up 50-49 with likely voters. And basically, there was a point when Biden was in his slide when Trump pulled up 3 or 4 points. But this is where the race has been in Wisconsin and pretty much everywhere.
Hoboken, New Jersey. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm probably pretty left Democrat. And I'm voting for Harris. I was a big fan of Walz, and I really liked your show this morning where you gave an apology to Tim for dismissing him on thinking that Walz was going to be a good pick. And I think you should consider making a similar apology to Vice President Harris, because I think that you said very strongly that this was the first major decision she's making, and she made the wrong decision. And I think she made the right decision. And I think that she stood up for the right decision against a lot of people telling her it was the wrong decision. And I want to give you 3 reasons why I think it was the right decision. The first is that Tim Walz is 60 and looks a lot older. And Josh Shapiro is 51 and looks like a Kennedy or an Obama. Tim Walz makes her look in her prime and ready to go. When she stands next to Josh Shapiro, she looks a little frumpy and over the hill. That's not a good thing. Second thing is the president-to-be, I hope, laughs a lot. When she stands around Josh Shapiro, who's always deadly serious, although a great speaker and a great Democrat and someone I support, she looks a little silly, a little less serious. When she's around Tim Walz, who's funny as hell, she comes across as a happy warrior and someone who gets the joke, but she's not unserious. The third thing is Walz and Shapiro have essentially similar policies on Israel and Gaza. But whereas Walz frames his policies in ways that welcome Democrats, welcome the uncommitted people, welcome the people who question whether or not we're doing the right thing in Gaza, welcomes the people, the Democrats, who want to have a ceasefire backed up by threat of sanctions or withholding support. Josh Shapiro calls the protesters ill-informed and compares them to KKK members. And those people are going to come to Chicago if Josh Shapiro is there, not because everyone's anti-Semitic, but because it's like a battle. And
okay, I think that was great analysis, points that I would not have thought of. Right, conversation here between a couple of leftists, hosted by Aaron David Miller, and talking with Amos Harel from Haaretz.
Alternative pathway or counter-trauma.
Look, I have to believe in that. I stay in this country. I'm a Zionist. I still believe in the original ideas.
but it's harder and harder to stick to them and to be hopeful and optimistic about the future, considering everything that has happened. Part of the problem here, as I mentioned to David, is the fact that these atrocities have driven the country, the Israeli society, almost crazy. And since I talked to David, and since this was printed, there's a new story breaking in Israel, which has to do with sort of an Israeli Abu Ghraib jail, if you'd like. All kinds of. It's not only,
and it's based on a lie. All right, the story is that Israeli soldiers like anally raped some Palestinian prisoner. It turns out that the anal wound that the guy suffered was self-inflicted, perhaps because he was trying to shove and store a cell phone up his ass. But I noticed so many people on the Israeli left were just so quick to want to believe that these Israeli soldiers were rapists. Right? There was a great emotional need.
Palestinian accusations. It's actually the military police who are now investigating such charges against Israeli reserve soldiers who presumably tortured and even raped a Palestinian prisoner.
Right. He's got this deep emotional need as a leftist to want to believe that these Israeli soldiers tortured and raped a Palestinian terrorist. Right. He's so invested in that perspective.
So this is, again, I'm not saying that this never happened in 48. Perhaps it did, and perhaps there were terrible events in the war of what we call the War of Independence during that time. And yet we've moved forward. We've become, in many ways, a westernized liberal society, in spite of the occupation, and in spite of the problems with.
Move forward, right? Move forward. If we become moving forward, if we become more liberal as opposed to nationalist.
Palestinians. But some of the things that are happening right now, it's hard for me to acknowledge that this is the Israel I know and I grew up in. It's very, very hard. Like many other Israelis, I'm having a very, very hard time.
Yeah, Israel's moved to the right.
Accepting this. I hope that things would improve. But I find it difficult to believe in that, considering what's happening around us right now, everything that we discussed, including the Hezbollah threat, and also considering our current leader. The fact that Netanyahu has been in power for so long is very problematic exactly regarding these issues.
I'll quote Jack Kennedy to finish here. Ideally,
what? I didn't get the exact timestamp that I wanted here. Let me see if
to assess who the next president of the United States is and how to comport his government in response. And elections at the earliest sometime in 2025. We're really nearing the end, but I wanted to ask you, as an Israeli, David Remnick has a profile of Yahya Sinwar in the latest issue of the New Yorker.
Man,
and
come on, 40.
70% of the Israelis are willing to go forward with this deal, even considering what you mentioned, that hundreds of terrorists who murdered Israelis in cold blood would be set free as well. There's huge support for that. And yet Netanyahu has not shown any real interest in moving this deal ahead. And this is, of course, for political reasons. We haven't mentioned this at all during all the time we spoke. But his specific position right now is all about political survival. He needs to remain in power. He needs to delay the legal proceedings against him. He's still standing trial for 3 different counts of corruption, and he desperately needs to stay in power. And therefore, he relies entirely on the support of 2 extreme right-wing parties that oppose such a deal. And that's the main issue. Some of the journalists who are close to him are saying, look, he's playing a game. He's trying to apply more pressure. There will be more assassinations against Hamas. And finally, Sinwar either.
Okay, so I'm not pulling up the exact time span, but he's really upset that Israelis have a sense of vengeance. Right? To him, this is the worst thing.
Is that we are going down the drain, and Sinwar has helped drag us there. When we justify things we never would have justified before, we are in the moral gutter. Words like revenge used to be heard only among the Bezalel Smotriches and the Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Right. So the idea of revenge is a horror to Aaron David Miller and Amos Harel, because if you're on the left, you think revenge is horrible. But all punishment contains considerable elements of revenge. If you put your kid in a timeout, right, there's an element of vengeance and revenge there because they've just become so annoying. So one of the big differences between the left and right is that people on the right have a much stronger belief in punishment for bad behavior. And people on the left think that punishment and revenge is just really petty and primitive.
Years of the world. Now military units and mainstream colonels are using terms like nakama, revenge, in Hebrew. It's almost part of.
Right. These leftists are just appalled that the revenge and the desire to punish your enemies is driving people.
Right? So it's like always the main character chooses somebody not as competent as they are. For example, Obama chose Biden, and then Biden had to choose Kamala. Now Kamala has to choose Walz.
Could you say menstruating one more time?
I know. I think I've said that more times than I care to.
I hope no one's playing a drinking game.
How toxic is that they put the word men in that?
I have a theory about why the vice president chose Governor Walz as her running mate. I could very easily be wrong. This is my own personal take. But if you think about it, I think it was more about her opportunity to strike out on her own than it was about any electoral strategy. If you're Kamala Harris, you are handed Biden's record to defend. You are handed your senior staff at the White House. You are handed your campaign platform. You are handed your campaign staff all the way up to the top. With 3 months to go, she has had very little say in anything that's going on so far in terms of her own presidential prospects.
Not saying anything.
She wanted to go with Walz. I think it was an emotional, a sort of heart pick rather than a head pick. What?
Is that what you're saying? She's emotional, so she chose this
Yes, and she's menstruating.
I don't like what you're saying, Jillian.
Okay, that was on the Greg Gutfeld show. David Starkey is a giant, right? His analysis is so much more intelligent than the right-wing provocateurs like Tucker Carlson and Michael Sodovich and Milo Yiannopoulos and Douglas Murray. Here is David Starkey.
Hindu and Pakistani, Hindu Muslim, and I'm afraid between whites and everybody else. What we've really got to understand is that we've had a public policy which has tried to keep enforced silence. I'm an example of it. My own cancellation. There's been a deliberate attempt ever since Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech, the language of which was overblown, but the points that he made were absolutely true, now being proved true even as we speak. Now, unfortunately, the decision was taken that you simply shut people up. If you do not debate a question, if you do not discuss it, if you do everything you can to make it undiscussable, then I'm afraid it's like a sore in the body. It's an untreated wound. It becomes deeper and
So David Starkey is talking about the riots in the United Kingdom against two-tier policing, whereby Muslims aren't held to the same standards as white English, right? Muslims can go around with machetes, and the police show no interest in disarming them.
Deeper and more septic until finally it bursts horribly to the surface. And I'm using a deliberately foul metaphor because what's going on now is foul. Threatening to burn people alive, which is what it amounts to, is monstrous. That sort of rioting is monstrous. But the fact that it's monstrous doesn't mean that there are not real reasons for it. And it's all very well. Starmer is a natural authoritarian. And one of the things we need to talk about, he presents himself as a policeman. We've never had a prime minister who presented himself as a policeman before. We had a great prime minister, Robert Peel, who invented our police force, but with the deliberate idea it was not by force, it was not by violence, it wasn't by water cannons, it was by consent. It wasn't neo-military, it wasn't an army of occupation. And Starmer, of course, represents that worst, that as in so many other ways, continental tendency. And he is every single thing he says, he does, everything that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, does, makes things worse.
Do you think that multicultural societies can survive without authoritarianism?
Generally not. I mean, the great example is Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, an intensely ethnic country in the Balkans, positively flourished under a communist dictatorship. It was the poster boy for communism under Tito. The moment you try to introduce democracy, then there is the problem, because each group then pits itself against every other group. And can we just again, very seriously, Stephen, we're talking about a tragedy. We're talking about a profound world-scale tragedy, which is why Elon Musk's language is not inappropriate. The Britain I grew up in was the most peaceful, the most gentle, homogenous society that has ever existed. Why we did not need identity cards, why there are extraordinarily low levels of crime, such high levels of public trust. That has been destroyed. It has been deliberately destroyed by Tony Blair and New Labour with this absurd notion that they were going to force us to become multi-ethnic for our good. They were going to rub the noses of the whites in the dirt. And sorry, we've got to understand that. It is an act of such inconceivable national self-harm.
You mentioned rubbing the noses of the whites. I think you're referring to a comment about rubbing the noses of the right in diversity, which was allegedly a comment that a Blairite politician made at the time. And it's interesting, you talk about high trust society. Lee Kuan Yew, the Singaporean leader, he wrote about coming to Britain, I think in the 1940s, and he wrote about how amazing it was that we were able to have some kind of trust box or some like newspaper box or something where you kind of take a newspaper and you put the money in. And he just thought this was an absolutely exceptional, amazing example of civilization. And then Singapore famously is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country, and he was very successful in making that country succeed. And many would argue he did that through authoritarianism. So do you think that this is inevitable in Britain today?
right, let's be quite clear about Lee Kuan Yew. It was absolute authoritarianism. What there is in Singapore is a very, very high level of economic freedom and absolutely no serious level of political freedom or freedom of speech. And the risk is we go or try to go down that route. And again, it's easy to see why we might. As I've said, Starmer represents an intensely authoritarian streak. Again, people get very confused here. Because Starmer was a human rights lawyer, they think he's sort of all soft and cuddly, because human rights are really nice, aren't they? But what we've got to remember is that the sort of human rights that Starmer represents are the rights only of minorities. This is the terrifying thing. Democracy has been stood on its head. Democracy means the rule of the majority. It's now completely inverted to mean the protection of every exotic minority you can think of against the majority. And the only way you can protect them is by aggressive policing, the sort of behaviour that we saw from Mark Rowley, Sir Mark Rowley, the as it were, overnighted, in every sense of the word, overnighted Metropolitan Police Commissioner. When he's asked a question about two-tier policing, what does this arrogant do? He strikes the head of the microphone out of the journalist's hand. The sheer contemptuous arrogance. Because again, what we've got to understand too, Steve, is that we really do have two-tier policing in every possible way. It's not simply that a Muslim demonstration will be policed differently from white, then there's no such thing as the EDL, but let's use the word for just the moment. It's not simply that it will be policed differently, but the entire language has been perverted. Have you heard constantly this word community? Now, what is this wonderful community whose values we are preserving are? What they are sub-ethnic groups, not simply Bangladeshi, not simply Muslim. They're extraordinarily Romani, the most persistently anti-legal, as it were, anti that sort of society that we just both described now, the picture of England in the 1950s. Those are specially protected groups. The police handle them with kid gloves, as we saw in Rochdale, as we saw in Leeds. Not only do they handle them with kid gloves, they actually negotiate with them catastrophically as groups with community leaders, unelected, self-generated. There's only one group, Stephen, that is not allowed to do that, and it's the white working class. And this is why they are rebelling. They are not allowed to have a community. They are not allowed to have their community leaders consulted. Again, you see, there are huge questions behind this. One of the things, again, I want to put two or three of these big questions because nobody else has done it. What we're seeing now is a movement in the political tectonic plates on a scale that has not taken place since the end of the First World War and the replacement of the Liberal Party by the Labour Party. What we've seen over the last few days is the end of the Labour Party's relationship with the white working class. It's finished, it's over, it's done. Of that entire red wall, I will predict there will not be a single Labour seat left in it in a future general election. The question is, where does that vote go? Traditionally, it would go to the Conservative Party. The greatest Conservative Prime Minister, who isn't Churchill, it's Disraeli, says the Conservative Party is a national party or it's nothing. We need, I'm going to say these words out loud, we need an English national party. Why is it such a wicked thing to say? Because there's a Scottish National Party, there's a Welsh National Party. They're both rabidly pro-immigrant and anti-English, are they not? I mean, the evidence of Scotland is overwhelming. The entire thing is driven by a bizarre sort of anti-Englishness, a deliberate separation of two peoples who have got along extraordinarily well to their extraordinary mutual benefit ever since the Act of Union. That's been ruptured. So.
Okay, some great commentary there from David Starkey, who has terminal health problems, so he's not going to be around for long, but an absolute intellectual treasure. That's it for me.